Director of Energy Institute Nigeria. I would like to warmly welcome you to yet another edition of the Energy Dialogue series. So for the benefit of those who don't know the Energy Institute, we are the professional membership body. We're bringing together global energy expertise. So what does this mean? We gather and share essential knowledge about energy. We also help energy professionals further develop their skills in the changing energy landscape. We have 20,000 members across 120 countries. We articulate their collective voice and use it to advance good practice and standards in the industry. So if you're yet to be a member, I would like to invite you to join our network of professionals. So just a quick note on how today's session will go. We're going to have a 30-minute discussion, Amy and myself, and then we'll move on to the Q&A session, which should also be another 30 minutes. We plan to end this session in an hour. So please put your questions in the Q&A box below. So today's energy dialogue is themed how the petroleum sector can support sustainable development and diversification. We're going to draw on discussions looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals as they highlight how to provide and use energy in a way that it meets our current needs without compromising the ability of future generations meeting theirs. So in other words, how to build businesses for the future to take care of people of the future, our children, our grandchildren. We'll also discuss how African businesses, I beg your pardon, can transition into more sustainable energy future. So to give some background, in 2015, an agenda which included goals and targets was developed by the UN to help eradicate poverty and to achieve sustainable development by 2030. I'll give you an example of some of these. SDG 7, for example, focuses on affordable and clean energy. SDG 9 focuses on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Another one is SDG 12, which focuses on responsible production and consumption. The list goes on and on. I'm sure you can all look through the UN's website for this. So the 2030 Agenda was a landmark achievement, providing a shared global vision towards sustainable development for all. One of the most exciting things about this particular agenda for me is that it creates like an excellent opportunity for private sector to revalidate and further demonstrate the crucial role they play in achieving these goals. So really, it cannot be left predominantly to the government. So to talk us through on how oil and gas companies can play a role in ensuring that they achieve these goals, I would like to introduce one of Africa's finest CEOs, Dr. Amy Jadesimi. Just to introduce her, she's the CEO of Ladol. She oversees West Africa's largest logistics and engineering facility. Ladol is utilizing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, hence the reason why we've been and they're expanding services to sectors outside of oil and gas and thereby creating tens of thousands of jobs. Dr. Jadesimi is an Oxford-trained medical doctor who worked at Goldman Sachs, and attended Stanford Graduate School of Business. He also serves as an Archbishop Tutu Fellow, working to reduce maternal mortality amongst women in sub-Saharan Africa. She was also named Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. She'll be bringing her wealth of expertise to speak and discuss with us today. Thank you very much, Amy, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. I'd like to welcome you to please take the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Yoande, and thank you to the Energy Institute. I'm happy to be with everyone today and talk about what we're doing at Ladol, why I think sustainable industrialization is the way forward, and how we can make this a model for the whole of Africa.
Wow, we losing. Okay. We can hear you.
Okay, so do you want to start with the questions, or?
You can go ahead and do it now. So Toby is just putting that up.
Okay, great. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, the development of Ladol actually started in 2001. That's when the founders started putting the business plan together. And the founders were a group of businessmen who had experience in oil and gas, experience in real estate, experience in accounting. And they realized that if Nigeria was going to industrialize, we needed locations where the biggest industrial projects in the world could take place. If you can go to the next slide. So Ladol started development as a disused swamp. We got the land in 2004. You can go to the next slide. So we got the land in 2004 from the Nigerian Ports Authority. And from inception, the business plan was based around sustainable themes. So even before the Sustainable Development Goals became ratified in 2015, we were already thinking sustainably. And that's because we were embarking on something that had never been done before. Building an industrial-free zone privately from scratch as Nigerians, looking to trailblaze in terms of ensuring that key projects that we currently couldn't do anywhere on the continent were done in Nigeria, and thereby creating a multiplier effect for job creation, etc. So the concept of Ladol was to focus on high-value industrial activities. So those are industrial activities with expensive inputs or outputs or processes. And those require you to have a location that is like a safe haven, that operates 24/7, where you can have everything provided for you, and you as the operator just need to come and do your work. Because we're developing this privately, we started with the oil and gas sector purely because it's the largest industry in Nigeria. And by starting with that industry, we were able to develop the zone from a disused swamp to where it is today, where it has the only deep offshore fully integrated logistics base in West Africa. That logistics base has halved the cost of deep offshore logistics, making Nigeria competitive with other countries in the world for the first time in terms of our deep offshore support. And we also have the shipyard that has the highest lifting capacity in the whole of Africa, and also has the largest fabrication and integration facility. Now, both these facilities together already take us a long way towards being the hub for industry. But putting together a business like this isn't just about these facilities. It's about the support. It's about the free zone. It's about the government agencies. It's about, the networks in between, the utilities. Because we're operating 24/7, you need a hotel, you need other accommodation, you need catering, you need fully staffed offices, et cetera, et cetera. So you're basically running a small industrial town. So underneath all of that, you need to have robust policies and procedures that enable you to run seamlessly and also to scale up, because it's a free zone, so you're building it in phases. So the point of this slide we're looking at now is that this slide kind of encapsulates all of those different underlining benefits of being in Ladol, but also the processes that you have to think about incorporating in your business model. So it doesn't matter whether you're building an industrial free zone, as we did, or you're building a free zone to focus on FMCG, or you're building a free zone to focus on other aspects of the oil and gas business. You've got to have policies and procedures that support everything you're doing. And the more robust they are, the more scalable they are, the better your company will be. And from inception, our policies and procedures were always based on the SDGs. And as Yewande said at the beginning, the SDGs provide you with a framework. There are 17 SDGs, 164 targets. And what that means is for each SDG, there is an underlying range of targets that give you actually quite specific things to work towards as a business. So a good example is hiring women. SDG 5 is about equality in the workplace, and particularly having an equal number of men and women, having parity of men and women in the workplace. Now, why should that be part of you? Why should that SDG matter to you? Well, there have been many, many studies on this. One of them was done by McKinsey, and that showed that if you achieve parity in the workplace between men and women, you will increase the global GDP by $28 trillion. That's over 20% of the global GDP. So each of the SDGs, even the ones that it wouldn't naturally occur to you to think about, has within it policies and procedures which you need to embed in your company, which will drive you to create an organization that is more sustainable, but is also more profitable. So if you go to the next slide. And this is really important in Nigeria. Why am I talking about policies and procedures and things? Because we have now accepted, I think this was accepted in Nigeria for a long time, but now by we, I mean the entire world, even the wealthy countries of the world have now accepted that you're not going to develop countries like Nigeria, you're not going to develop the continent of Africa through copy and paste. We need to create new economy business models, which is a catchphrase way of saying we need to think of new ways of doing things. And if you look at a country like Nigeria and look at the size of the market, and this is a good slide just to show that Nigeria is one of the largest underserved markets in the world. So in other words, if you're thinking of setting up a new business, this is the place to set it up. And if you're thinking of setting up a new business, you need to think of a new business model, something that's never been done in the world before. And if you combine the needs of the market and the opportunities in the market with your need to create new solutions, with the Sustainable Development Goals, you will have a very robust business model that you can build on. And this is effectively what we did with Ladol. We looked at the addressable market. We saw a market opportunity. We built a company, but that company was based on a new business model, which yes, had specific targets in terms of I need to build this infrastructure, I need to build these facilities, I need to provide these services. But the way and manner in which I do that and the way and manner in which I scale my company over the next 100 years depends on having a robust system in place. And that system, which is encapsulated, if you have, those of you who have ISO 9001 or any of the other international certifications will know, in a series of policies and procedures that can all be tied to the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's how useful the Sustainable Development Goals are as a framework for business. I think we've lost the presentation, but I can just summarize the presentation by saying that there is a huge market in Nigeria. We need to find a new way of addressing that market. We have within the SDGs a framework that can help us create these new business models. And we're fortunate in Nigeria to have a huge market that has yet to be addressed through local solutions. And local solutions are always the best solutions. Every study that's ever been done has shown that local content is always cheaper than imported content. So if we have a local business that is using sustainable policies and procedures and that is adding value to the market in some way, that business is always going to outcompete other businesses. And given the size of the addressable market, you will have a substantial business on your hands in a relatively short amount of time. And by relatively short, I mean maybe 10 years. And that's the other thing that I think is important for everyone to appreciate. These businesses are not businesses that will give you a return in 3 months or 6 months or 1 year. These are medium to long-term businesses. And that's very important because when you're trying to create a new world, when you're trying to industrialize a country the size of Nigeria, or you're trying to industrialize across Africa, you have to think in terms of decades. And it's very important that the time horizons that people put on the projects they're developing are in terms of decades. Now let's come to the link between sustainability and the oil and gas sector and diversification. So Ladol as a company, as I said, started out to create an industrial free zone, developing it privately. We initially targeted the oil and gas sector because it's the largest industry in Nigeria. And so that would be an industry that would have the capacity to enable us to have the revenues that we needed to grow. We can move to the next slide. Now, having now secured over the past 19 years now, sufficient oil and gas business, we have been able to achieve our phase 1 target, which was to develop enough of the zone to have an anchor tenancy in the zone of sufficient capacity that we can now leverage that to develop the rest of the zone. And in this case, the anchor tenant is basically ourselves providing various services. But you will all know that the oil and gas industry contracts with people over the medium to long term. So if you're looking to industrialize a country like Nigeria over a wide range of sectors, you could do very well by starting out with a business model and a master plan based on sustainably developing a solution. It can be a free zone, it can be an engineering solution, it can be a manufacturing solution that adds value to the local market, therefore attracts medium to long-term contracts from the oil and gas sector. And you can then leverage those contracts to expand your business to address the non-oil and gas sector. And since the oil and gas sector is the most challenging, demands the highest standards, and requires the highest level of training in terms of your personnel and expertise, to move from servicing the oil and gas sector to servicing other sectors is pretty much seamless. And you will have already defrayed a lot of your CapEx costs while you were servicing the oil and gas sector. So already, Ladol has entered the market. We have halved the cost of deep offshore logistics support servicing, so adding tremendous value to the IOCs we work with. And we are now in the process of leveraging those arrangements to develop the rest of the zone to service non-oil and gas. And some of the facilities we built for oil and gas are multifunctional. So for example, cold storage, which you use for oil and gas companies, can also be used for agricultural companies. And as we expanded our master plan and finalized it, what we've actually done is turn our master plan into a circular economy. So in the case, specifically in the case of Ladol now, we've created a master plan that turns the zone over the next 5 years into a circular economy. And we've done that by working with various consultants. And those consultants have helped us target sectors, so business sectors, such as healthcare, green energy, technology, FMCG, training. They've helped us target sectors and then target companies within those sectors that when operating together within the zone, these companies will form a circular economy. And by having these companies in the zone, you create a virtuous cycle where the output of one or the waste of one can benefit other operations in the zone. So for example, the agricultural waste that we will generate in the zone can be used in our biomass plant to lower the cost of energy in the zone by 90%. And so the virtues of a circular economy are well known. Creating a circular economy is very difficult. And one way that you can overcome that difficulty is to develop a sustainable industrial free zone as we have done, but do it in a phased way where you start off by leveraging industries that require a lot of CapEx, that require high standards, that require a lot of facilities, and essentially require you to build all the elements you need in order to create a sustainable ecosystem, and then enable you to leverage that to bring in other sectors as well. So that covers, I think we can go to the next slide. I think there's one more slide. So that covers what we're doing at Ladol. And what we've done now is we've worked with a range of organizations who have already looked at our master plan and taken up our master plan, and we are already working with those international organizations to replicate the master plan outside of Nigeria. So we won't be doing this replication. We've created a blueprint which we'll share with other people so that they can use and replicate this model, because our vision is to have sustainable industrial special economic zones throughout Africa. And this will enable African industry to be sustainable, far more sustainable than that in Western countries. And that sustainability brings with it higher profitability. So that's, I think I'll leave it there because I don't want to do too much talking. And then maybe we could have a Q&A.
Thank you very much, Amy. I think we have our Q&A segment open now, but I'll start off by just saying thank you for that presentation. You raised some key points, and I like that you used Ladol as an example and just explaining how you're contributing, number one, to the growth of the sector and also promoting sustainability in Africa. I think that was fantastic. So my first question is, can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so Ladol is a large indigenous organization. A lot of companies in Nigeria are not necessarily as big as you are. So I was just wondering, can you give me 2 to 3 practical points on what smaller indigenous companies can do to achieve these goals? And how can they do it without necessarily affecting their profitability and changing their business models too much?
Sure. So, I mean, Ladol is, in some ways, Ladol is still a very small company, certainly in global terms. But the important thing about the sustainable development goals is that they don't add to your cost, they lower your cost. So, you know, I mentioned the example of goal 5, which is about female equality. You also mentioned in your opening goal 7, I think, which which is about clean energy. Now, goal 7 should decrease your costs, not increase your costs. If you set up a company from inception and you set as one of your goals in that company, well, we're going to focus on green energy, yes. And therefore you make purchases such as solar panels for the rooftop. Now, initially, that purchase may cost you more, but over time, it will cost you less. So sustainable development goals are a guide that for large or small companies can actually help you make better decisions today. If you also look at goal 8 is about decent work and decent employment. So it's not just about getting people employed, it's getting decent employment. And if you give people a living wage, if you give them training, and that doesn't cost you, if you have a small company, let's say you're running a bakery, there's you and 2 other people. If you invest yourself in those people, if you give them a living wage, you improve their quality of life. It doesn't have to be money. You can just improve someone's quality of life through education. The first step is to think about it and make a conscious decision. If I want to think about this goal, what are the aspects of my employees' lives that I can improve? If you give someone decent work, you will end up with a far more productive employee, even in a very small company. So it's important, first of all, to appreciate that the goals themselves have capacity to save you money, increase your productivity, and even increase your revenues, because lastly, you can target these new industries. You can target solutions and business opportunities in a unique way that will give you a unique selling proposition and will give you more value addition than your competitors who may be doing things the way they were done, 20 years ago in wealthier countries.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Amy. Can you hear me clearly? I think some people are saying they can't hear you clearly.
Oh, okay. I can hear you clearly, but it might be the network is not very stable.
All right, that's fine. So thank you for that. So my next question has to do with other revenue streams, and I think you already spoke on that earlier. But I don't know, is there any move that you think local organizations in Nigeria can do to move to another sector and still make sure that they work profitably. So let me give you an example. Downstream company, for example, they find ways to, they're looking for ways to cut back their costs. You know, what form of business or what kind of business can they do to sort of cut back their costs? I think you mentioned something that Ladol did earlier. I don't know how you put this within the context of saving money.
So in the context of saving money, one of the goals is about collaboration. I think that's goal 17. So the first thing that looking at the goals does, it helps you to think outside the box. So first of all, don't think about your company, particularly if you're a smaller company, don't think about yourself as an individual entity. Think of yourself as part of a community, as a potential collaborator. Think about the sharing economy. So if your company is a 10-man company, a 20-man, a 100-man company, how can you work with others to share equipment, to share personnel? Initially, you could even share a gen, and you could move from sharing a gen to, you could work together, buy a biomass generator instead of a diesel generator, and work with the local farmers. So there are a lot of opportunities when, you know, the goals really invite you to think about sharing economy and to think about how you can collaborate more closely with others, because in doing that, you automatically reduce waste. So I think thinking through ways to collaborate with your neighbors is really important. And I think looking at the goals and just forcing yourself to do the exercise of how can I apply the goals in my business will help you think of more ways in which you can collaborate.
Thank you. So I just heard that the question and answer session box rather is not on there. We're not sure why. So can you please put your questions in the chat box instead? There's one question for you, Amy, from Professor Umi Iledari, and he's asking, would you please educate on how best to address funding challenges for emerging indigenous firms?
So funding is a huge issue. It continues to be an issue for everybody, including Ladol. You know, there are development finance institutions that we've all heard about who are supposed to finance companies, indigenous companies. That's really what, you know, if you read the blurb, that's what they're about. They're about supporting the local economy, and you have to support the local private sector. Yes. You will be surprised how many of these development finance institutions have never directly put money into the hands of an African person. They can put money into a bank, and then the bank can lend to you. They can put money into a huge syndicated scheme where you see, you know, they love to do these things where, yes, $1 billion power plant, and, you know, but for them to actually put $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 into the hands of an entrepreneur, which is the key, because 80% of the jobs we're going to create in Africa are going to be created by small and medium-sized enterprises. So first of all, what I'm basically saying is the way in which DFIs function, if their function is to enable development, real development in African economies through making finance available, they don't currently have the right mechanisms to do that. And many of them have recognized this, and many of them, and I mean recognized this recently, maybe in the past decade, they've recognized it, but most of the ones I've met with, even if they've recognized it, they haven't changed their internal mechanisms. And they talk about things like definition of bankability. And if you're an African, and this includes Ladol, and you're trying to raise money for one of these institutions, definition of bankability means I have to give you at least 100% security. So the money, if you're lending me $100, I have to give you something that's worth $100. On top of that, I have to guarantee you that the revenues and the profit I am going to earn from the thing you're giving me the $100 from is going to be sufficient to pay you back your money plus a 20% return. In what universe, in what country in the world are people getting a 20% return in the last 2 decades? So I'm now doing a startup. I somehow have to find assets to give you. And on top of the assets, I have to guarantee you a return, which is, I mean, it's crazy. And I've said this in many conferences, and I've said that the definitions of bankability make no sense. Now, contrast this with what is available in somewhere like Silicon Valley. So I did part of my education in Stanford. So if you are a graduate of a business school like Stanford, you can probably raise up to $1 million just by having a good idea. You know, so I have a good idea, and and I have these credentials, and the idea, best localized in, there's one company, there's a couple of companies I know. One of them is Pagatech, that have managed to raise money from Silicon Valley and bring it into Africa, but that's very rare. So if I'm a graduate from a university like this and I'm pursuing a business model in that part of the world, it's very easy for me to raise money, and it's very easy to build industry. So in other words, the place where the money is needed, and I don't mean it's needed because we need favors. I mean, it's needed for, I used to be a banker, so I'm seeing it's needed in the context that if you are a banker and you need to make a return on your investment so that you can ultimately pay pensions and things of people in 20 years, you need to be investing in Africa because that's where the growth is. But there's no way for you to practically invest in Africa because most of the financial instruments currently available don't let you do that. So that's a long-winded way of saying I empathize with everybody on the call who's finding it difficult to raise money. So what is the solution? The solution is this. We have to grow and finance our local industries ourselves, and this is what we did with Ladol, to the level where we either become bankable. In other words, we create enough capacity in the local market that we now either meet these definitions of bankability, or the local market becomes so important that we drive a change in the definitions of bankability, one or the other. So we have to grow the local businesses, the local capacity ourselves, till we reach that level of importance and that volume that drives that change one way or the other. And that means we have to locally finance. Now, the advantages of locally financing are many. And so if you're borrowing in Naira, you're paying back in Naira, it doesn't matter what the exchange rate is. This is something I really want people to embrace. Now, the final part of this, though, is even if I'm saying, okay, local currency, that doesn't solve all the problems. It's still currency of whatever, whether it's Naira or dollar, it's still currency. So the final thing I'll say is, as we were building Ladol, there were months where I only had enough in the bank. So it's the beginning of the month, and I only have enough money in the bank. This is a true story, to pay that month's salaries. That's all the money I have in the bank. So the message I'm sending to people is it's really hard. Don't look at a company like Ladol and think it ever gets easy. It's still hard for us. But what we did was this. We had a commitment to a long-term vision. And no matter how much money we had available, we tightened our belts and we invested in the company. And to me, that's the only way you can do it. You just have to decide, I'm not going to go on holiday. I'm not going to have nice clothes. I'm not going to do those things. I'm going to invest in the business because that's what it takes. And the other thing we did was, with that level of commitment, some years I have enough to invest tens of millions of dollars. Some years I only have enough to invest $1 million, but every year I invested something. So every year I either build a road, or I build a warehouse, or I build a sewage treatment plant. Every year I do something. So that every year you are incrementally adding to your vision. And if you're an engineering company, maybe in the first year or the first 5 years, it's only you. But then in year 6, you hire 10 people. But then you're building, and built into that is the assumption that you never exceed what you think you can comfortably afford, so that you're always building onto the next level. And that's not always possible, but try and aim for that. So I think local finance is the key. Beg, use, angel financing, go to the bank, sell your business model. I have had meetings, I spent my life, I've waited outside people's offices for 10 hours. There's no shortcut. So you do all of that. Every single person you can think of, every bank manager, if he can give you 10 million Naira, take the 10 million Naira and invest in your business. And if you have a business that has a solid master plan, that has a long-term view, and you know that you're going to add value, it's worth it. Because the belief we had in Ladol is that we knew that this was a very solid plan. And there's lots of issues and lots of things that come up, but the fundamentals of the business were very strong. And as I showed in that slide, the fundamentals of most businesses in Nigeria are very strong because our market is hardly being addressed through local solutions.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that, Amy. I have another question from Ben Shak. He's a regulator, or rather, he works with a regulator, and he's wondering how the SDG goals can be optimized by a regulator, and also how to promote collaboration within stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's so important that we work closely with government. You know, government, like private sector companies, it's all about individuals. And there are certainly people we're working with in government now who have a clear understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals and want to see them achieved. I think also there are people in government who want to give space to private sector, to allow private sector to achieve those goals. And there are people in government who couldn't care less. So you have the full spectrum, but all you need is those 1 or 2 or 3 people who will enable you to, who will work with you, who will enable you, who will understand what you're trying to achieve. Now, as a country, Nigeria has, through the Ministry of the Environment, has set Sustainable Development Goal targets. We've set climate change targets. And I think that this government has done a good job of recognizing that to achieve those targets, they have to work with private sector. So I would encourage private sector people who have business models that help to achieve the targets that Nigeria has set to engage with government and, you know, to discuss how what you're doing can help achieve those goals and push that through. And also engage with the banks, because there's a lot of studies that have been done now that have definitively shown that companies that have strong sustainable development underpinnings, or that have sustainable business models, make more money. So funds that are dedicated to sustainable companies are now desperately looking for where to put that money. And I think that the COVID crisis, or from what I've seen so far this year, the COVID-19 crisis has actually increased the demand for sustainable business opportunities. And that's increased in the local market as well.
Thank you for that, Amy. Thank you. I think I find the part you said that it's the local private organizations that need to collaborate with government to achieve this. Thank you. We have another question from Frank. He's wondering if you can explain how application of circular design towards achieving transition to cleaner energy and sustainability. What can they do to achieve this?
So in the case of Ladol, we're essentially building a platform. So I'm building a semi-developed town where I'm offering people an opportunity to come in, set up their factories, and plug into a sustainable network. So when we're building out our infrastructure, the infrastructure we're building out now is to support a circular economy. So in practical terms, that means things like the reticulation system that would normally carry, you know, power and water and sewage is also designed to carry heat. And, you know, we're building in facilities that will enable us to plug into solar power more easily and so on. So as the infrastructure developer of the zone, I am building into the infrastructure and the general network sustainable systems that will enable companies that set up to operate more sustainably. Now, those companies will therefore have the advantage from day one of knowing they're in a sustainable environment, which will make them more profitable in the medium to long term. But for green energy, well, local engineering and local manufacturing. So again, where that comes in is we provide an environment that makes it and locally manufacture. And our aim is not just to have people, you know, import finished goods or even anything like that. We actually want to attract people, small to large companies, to come engineer locally, engineer a local design in the local market, and then manufacture it for the local market. That's the dream. And I think that government is already, obviously targeting this in the broad sense, but government can target it quite specifically as well, the way they've done in China, in certain states in America as well, by providing incentives for people who are in the field of engineering that go to green energy solutions to encourage them to set up. And then the advantage of a zone such as Ladol is that we can give them a fully serviced space in which they can do their engineering, and then they can move next door and do their manufacturing.
Thank you for that, Amy. Thank you. So the next question here is from me. I was wondering, so there are some companies with long-term visions, long-term planning, long-term capital investments. They have up-to-date technology, high-level expertise, in-depth procedures, but they still struggle. I was wondering, what are the barriers that they face, and how can they still achieve some level of sustainability?
What are the barriers? I think everybody's very familiar with the barriers, and I always like to talk about, the opportunity and not focus, because if there's no barriers, there's no opportunity, because, if all the issues have been addressed and the market has been, then there's no opportunity. So the thing about sustainability, the underlying premise is that sustainability gives you a better way of overcoming those barriers. That's the point. It's that the barriers are what create the business opportunity. But to take advantage of that business opportunity, you need a solution. You need to figure out, how am I going to address this market? And in markets like Nigeria, we've all learned now that nobody's going to come and do that for us. So so let's say you've got an engineering company and you want to attract people from the diaspora. When you're looking at attracting people and getting workers in, having a sustainable environment is a very attractive thing for people. Working in an ethical company, working in a transparent company, being able to demonstrate the impact you're having on your environment, these are all things that help you attract workers in. So whether it be about attracting people, figuring out how to get raw materials, figuring out how the manufacturing process should be done, sustainability threads through all of that. But of course, one of the barriers you also have to bear in mind, it's not a new barrier, but it's an important one here, is that because you're doing things in a new way, you literally have to think through from A to B everything yourself. And it's not a question of, there's really there's almost zero copy and paste, because you have to break things down to the bare bones and then build a foundation on a completely new type of business model from which you can then scale and grow. And as I said earlier, I think a really important aspect of this, which I wish they would embrace more in wealthier countries as well, is about the sharing. So when you break things down to their lowest level, our companies in Nigeria at this stage, we should be sharing knowledge, we should be sharing people, we should be sharing resources.
Thank you, Amy. Another question here is asking the African way is at times we want to do things ourselves. We don't like to, collaborate because of many reasons. So he's asking that, how can businesses still survive with this kind of mentality in Africa?
So it depends on how far you take it. But what I will say is the mentality, one of the overriding characteristics of a lot of businesses, particularly where you don't have local content, is that we're basically agents. So a lot of time when people say they want to do things themselves is because they're an agent. If I'm making a percentage off of the revenue that I've, somehow managed to help somebody to get a contract that gives them X revenue, and my takeaway is a percentage of that revenue, then you can't really build a sharing economy on that, because you're not adding value. What you're doing is literally the opposite of sustainability, because you're actually increasing the cost of the whole project, et cetera, et cetera. So first of all, let's not get distracted by things that I consider to be faux local content. That's not real local content. You know, that's an agency, and there are situations and circumstances under which being an agent and having an agent does add value. But the particular scenario I just outlined is the opposite. That takes away from value. But if you are operating a business that adds value, and every day you're going into work and you're facing the same challenges as the person next door to you is facing, and you're let's say you're a Nigerian fabricator. The truth of the matter is Nigerian fabrication capacity is not sufficient for any one project. So how can we, as fabricators in Nigeria, talk about competing if there was one project and all the fabricators that met the standard required of that project were all fully utilized, we still wouldn't have enough capacity to do one major project. So we're not yet at the point where we can even talk about that. We, as you know, those of us who are fabricating should naturally be thinking in terms of collaboration, should naturally be thinking in terms of local content models that involve long-term contracting through the NCDMB with IOCs or other interested companies that can provide you with these long-term contracts. The oil and gas industry lends itself to that. This is exactly the model used in countries like Norway, which went from a country that was largely known for fishing to within 20 years was one of the most brilliant engineering and manufacturing, you know, oil and gas hubs in the world. And they did that in large part by putting in place these long-term contracts that were shared amongst the local, the qualified, and the qualification here is really important. If we do not ensure that we meet the standard, then we should just go home. But assuming we meet the standard, we should share the work amongst the qualified contractors. And if there are scarce resources, and one of the scarce resources is qualified people, qualified engineers, we should share those as well. So it's really about figuring out where we want to be as an industry. And then those who are willing to invest in meeting the standard, coming together and saying, okay, if we all meet the standard, what's the addressable market? Now, in a country like Nigeria, where the addressable market is so huge, we don't even have to worry about eating off each other's plate. We just have to worry about, if we all work together, how much of the addressable market can we meet today? And if we all work together and we agree to increase our capacity year on year, how much of the addressable market or how much of the market demand can we meet in a decade using local resources? And this, by the way, is what the NCDMB is working on. But I'm just saying that private sector needs to think this way as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There's another question from Rolake, and she's saying that, what do you think about the gender quota for boards in Nigerian companies, especially possibly in oil and gas? And how do you think women can be more effectively represented?
So I'm a big supporter of positive discrimination. And here's why. Because the playing fields are not level. If you don't have a level playing field, unless you have positive discrimination, you're never going to level the playing field. If you've got, think about two teams and they're playing football. And on one team, you have 20 people. I don't play football, so I don't know how many people are supposed to be on the football team. But let's imagine it's 20 people. So on one side, you've got 20 people, and they've all been playing football together since they were 5. They've had the best training. They're fantastic football players. On the other side, you've got 3 guys, who just came back from work, and they're already tired, and they're now being told to play against these 20 guys. Now, how are those 3 guys ever, and that is the way the world has been set up. It's the way the world has been set up in terms of poor high-growth countries like Nigeria versus the wealthier countries. It's the way the world has been set up in terms of women versus men. If I leave work to have a baby, I can't come back. My husband treats me badly and nobody cares. So if the deck is stacked against us, we have to positively discriminate in order to level the playing field. And here's the important thing. I'm a strong believer in evidence-based decision-making. So we have decades, and I mean decades of evidence to show that having women on boards increases profitability. And it doesn't increase profitability a little bit. In some studies, it's 10%. In some studies, it's 20%. It depends on how you define profitability. But the point is, you make more money if there are women on the boards, you know, and you make enough additional money that it's worth investing in schemes that allow women to work from home. It's worth investing in paternity leave. That's paternity, that's men going home to stay with the children. It's worth investing in training women. It's worth investing in going out and actively recruiting women, because it will make your company more profitable. So all of these things are initiatives that private sector already knows makes them more money. But we have to change the way we structure our companies. And in some cases, we have to change the way in which we structure our societies in order to achieve these benefits.
I see. Thank you. I think you've answered that very well. Another question from me has to do with our current reality, which is COVID-19 pandemic and all the economic effects of it. So crash in oil prices, crash in oil demand, supply glut. And how big do you think this setback would be for companies? And is this a good time to consider, you know, maybe not focusing on sustainability for these kind of companies, you know, because some of them would say that there are other priorities. I mean, how can they possibly strike a balance?
So I think right now we're living through a time of great uncertainty and higher risk. And the uncertainty also includes an uncertainty about the level of risk. So in other words, you know there are sharks in the water. You don't know if it's one shark or 1,000 sharks, but you've got to get in the water anyway. So it's a difficult time. And it's a time of change, because we've all got to get in the water. And every country in the world struggled with COVID-19. In some ways, Nigeria has actually done better than a lot of other countries in the world. So everybody, in a way, is now, the playing field in a way has been leveled in terms of ways forward, solutions to move forward. In that it's now apparent that the solutions that are currently in place in the West are not robust enough. And we've already established, you know, that the solutions for continuing to industrialize, continuing to grow the economies in the West, continuing to globalize in the way in which the West was globalizing is not sustainable. That had already been established. And in many ways, COVID-19 is not the first crisis. So we've had a lot of warning, you know, 4 or 5, depending on who. Hello? Sorry, hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, sorry, I got lost. Okay, I can hear you now. Sorry, okay.
I think we've lost Amy there.
Okay, am I back?
Yes, you are back.
Amy, can you hear me now?
Yes, I've got you now.
I think her reception isn't doing so well.
Yeah, okay, so if you can hear me, the summary of what I'm saying is, since we don't have any option but to jump in the water, and since across the world people are struggling with how to do that, it's not really a question of can you afford to do something? Can you afford to be sustainable? We know we have to do something. We have to figure out a way to navigate these new waters. And whether you navigate them using a sustainable solution or a non-sustainable solution, it will probably cost you the same, you know? But the difference with a sustainable solution is that there is a huge body of evidence that a sustainable solution is more likely to lead to a successful solution, particularly in the medium to long term. So you need to figure out what kind of boat do I need to build? And I have different options, but I already know that if I go more in the direction of sustainability, I'm more likely to be successful. So you should go in the direction of sustainability.
Okay, sorry, I had issues with my internet there. Yeah.
Well, it's not just me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, it's not just you. There's another question here on what can indigenous oil companies do to review their community development programs in the face of COVID-19?
Sure, this is really important. I think that, again, you know, everything I said about COVID-19 being the latest in a series of shocks, you know, warning signs, you know, those of you that have, that adhere to strict HSE standards will know that, you know, once you have a few near misses, it's only a matter of time until you have, you know, a serious accident. So we've had near misses. COVID-19 can be classed as a serious accident. It could be the first of many. So what I would advise is that we rethink our entire community engagement strategy towards making the community sustainable. And I'm using the word sustainable in this context to mean educating the community to help themselves. You know, what are the fundamental issues that the community is facing so that they can get the knowledge they need to help themselves, number one. It's not about free handouts. What are the resources the community needs so that they can help themselves? What are the job opportunities, the real job opportunities that will be long-lasting, that the community can engage in, that so they can help themselves? And what are the new business opportunities that have now been created by the shock of COVID-19 and the successive shocks we've had before, which have all driven us to realize that as a country, we need to be agriculturally independent, we need to be industrially independent, and we need to be independent from a human capital capacity perspective.
Great, thank you for that, Amy. I think we have just 3 minutes left, so I'll ask my final question. Can we move to the macro level? You mentioned in our last discussion a while back that there was a report you did with a group where you were able to demonstrate that the private sector, if private sector operations were taken seriously, that globally we can gain a $12 trillion in GDP. So I'm wondering, how can this GDP growth translate directly to the bottom line profitability for local companies here in Africa?
That's great. So I was one of the commissioners, I think there were about 36 of us, on the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, which was chaired by Lord Mark Malloch Brown. And there were commissioners from all over the world, different businesses. And we produced a report which came out in 2017, which showed that in just 4 verticals, healthcare, agriculture, energy, and urbanization, if the private sector pursued sustainable business opportunities, there could be $12 trillion of additional value. Now, for a country like Nigeria, this is really important. Most of the young people in the world are already in Africa. The growth, and what that means, people throw that around all the time, but what that means, if you're running a business today and you intend on running the same business 20 years from now, it's the young people that are going to work for you. It's the young people that are going to either use your product or drive the need for your product. So if most of the young people in the world are here, most of the revenues from these new business opportunities should be here. But that will only happen if we as local entrepreneurs look into those business opportunities. So if you're an entrepreneur now and you're looking into the healthcare sector, what are the sustainable opportunities in healthcare? And what this report shows is if you pursue those sustainable opportunities, those businesses that are linked to sustainable business models, you are going to be more profitable in the medium to long term, and you will better address the needs of the local market because you will bring more value addition through your business's contribution to the local economy.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Amy. Thank you. So moving on, I think our time is fast spent. We have a few more questions, but if it's okay, you can just send it directly to our email. I'm sure when Amy has time, she can respond.
Sure.
There's so much I've learned from this. It's been so informative and interesting. I think some points you've raised today has to do with funding and how it's important to push your business up to a level where it becomes bankable to anyone, whether an investor or a potential company that would like to collaborate with yours. I think that's one interesting point you raised. Another one is the private sector and how the private sector can help the government and policymakers on achieving our SDG goals as set by them. You also mentioned the importance of young people and how we have a huge population of that, and how they are the best to help move sustainability for Nigeria. I don't know, do you have any last few points to sort of bring everything home, you know, and encourage all of us, business owners?
I would just encourage everybody that, you know, we're doing so well as a country. You know, we're doing so well. We can't always see that because it's so hard, but we should really think about how we can move to the next level. And to do that, I really want to encourage collaboration. I want to encourage thinking outside the box and thinking sustainably.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you also for joining. Thank you for the fantastic questions. We have another webinar coming up next month. Information will be sent to you via email. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.